Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are tackling some source material that is, to put it mildly, ambitious. It's not just proposing a technological upgrade, it's laying out a blueprint for a fundamental evolutionary leap for our entire species.
It really is, and it starts by reframing our entire civilization in a pretty stark way. The sources call our current social setup, all of it. Politics, commerce, media, a low-grade primitive hive mind.
That phrase really hits you. The implication is that we're already a collective intelligence.
We are, but a terribly inefficient one. We're operating with these huge built-in handicaps. We're all networked, sure, but the fidelity of that connection is, well, it's almost zero.
And that core handicap, that fundamental flaw, is identified right at the start. It's the narrow straw as a symbolic language. And that analogy just sticks with you, doesn't it? I mean, just imagine for a second the entire unbelievably complex reality of your own inner life, all the thoughts, the emotions, the subjective texture of it all.
A whole symphony.
Exactly. And then you realize you have to force all of that, every single bit of it, through this tiny little tube of sounds or written symbols.
And the result is what the paper calls translation loss. It's the central problem of human interaction. This complex, multidimensional thing, your consciousness, has to get flattened out, put in a straight line, and reduced to these arbitrary little symbols.
You lose so much in the process.
You lose almost everything. And that's why we misunderstand each other. It's why great ideas get distorted. And, ultimately, it's why conflict is so persistent.
So our mission today is to really dig into the proposed solution here, which is a massive paradigm shift using things like cybernetic augmentation, brain-computer interfaces.
ACIs.
Right. The goal is to bridge human consciousness directly with advanced AI, creating what they call a social metamind. It's a high-fidelity global collective that, and this is the most important part, that absolutely guarantees the sovereignty of the individual.
That's the key, isn't it? That guarantee of autonomy, that's the firewall between this vision and, well, the usual dystopian sci-fi nightmare. It is. We're analyzing a system that's engineered for functional unity, but without erasing the self.
Okay, so let's lay out the roadmap for everyone listening. How are we going to build this idea up from the ground?
I think we have to. We'll start with the biological blueprint. The source argues this whole thing is based on a fractal architecture that nature already uses, specifically in our own nervous system.
Okay, the biological foundation.
Then we have to analyze the critical deviation from that blueprint. This is the concept of modular symbiosis, the absolute right of a person to, log in and log out.
The freedom part.
The freedom part. Third, we have to get into the really deep technical challenges, the network topography and this incredible security layer they propose called the neural fingerprint.
After that, we can get into the social contract. I mean, how does a society like this even operate? The claim is that high bandwidth empathy creates a kind of self-sanctifying ethical field.
And finally, we'll tackle the big one, the AI alignment problem. The paper defines the AI not as an external god, but as the indispensable Social Corpus Callosum.
It's a complete overhaul of everything, from how our cells talk to each other to how a global society governs itself. Let's dive in. All right, so if you're going to make a claim as huge as building a global consciousness, you can't just base it on, some futuristic fantasy. You need a rock-solid foundation.
And that's what's so compelling about the source material. It roots the entire argument in biology. It posits that the structure of this social metamind isn't an invention. It's just the next logical step in a pattern that nature has been using for billions of years.
The network of networks pattern.
That's the one. It's a pattern you see everywhere, ubiquitously, across biology and physics and other complex systems. You have subatomic particles organizing into atoms, atoms making molecules, molecules building cells. It's organization that's, well, it's fractal.
And the claim is that the human brain is the perfect working model for this.
It's the ultimate proof of concept. Consciousness itself is just an emergent property of all these integrated nodes working together. The scale of the nodes doesn't really matter, just the pattern of connection.
So the paper uses this to break down the 4 levels of organization that are already up and running inside every one of us right now. It starts at the most granular level.
Right, level 1, cellular. This is the individual neuron. And it's really important to get this. These individual nodes, the neurons, they have almost no local processing power. They're not smart on their own.
Their power is in the connection.
It's all in their density and their hyper-efficient high-bandwidth connection to their neighbors. They're just the basic foundational infrastructure. They do their little specialized tasks with, absolutely no sense of the bigger picture, the emergent self that we are.
Okay, and then those neurons start clumping together based on what they do and where they are. That brings us to level 2, regional.
Correct. These are the specialized regional hives in the brain. So you have the occipital lobe, which is a hive for handling vision. You have the cerebellum, a hive for coordinating movement. The limbic system, a hive for emotion.
So they're like departments in a company.
That's a great way to put it. They're integrated clusters, functional subgroups. They take all the raw data coming up from the level 1 nodes and they synthesize it into something specialized and actionable.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting. As we scroll up again, the paper points to level 3, hemispheric integration. This is apparently the key biological metaphor for the whole social system they're proposing.
This is absolutely the core of the biological argument. Level 3 is where you get this inherent 2-node hive mind, the left and right hemispheres of the brain.
Which are profoundly different from each other.
Profoundly. One is often focused on, linear analytical stuff, language. The other is more holistic, spatial, emotional. They're almost two different personalities.
Yeah.
But they form a single, unified identity.
Through the corpus callosum.
Through the corpus callosum. The source calls this the primary biological metaphor. And it is. It's this massive, super high bandwidth cable of nerve fibers that lets these two totally distinct processing centers share data and synchronize their activity. It's what integrates their different priorities into one single higher order self.
And we have real-world proof of this. We know from split brain patients where that connection is severed.
The corpus callosum is cut, right.
The result is this profound disunity. The person literally feels like they have two separate minds fighting for control, two different centers of agency.
And that's such a powerful point because it proves that the bridge is the unity. When the bridge fails, the whole integrated system collapses into chaos. You need that high bandwidth connection to get coherence.
Okay, so you have the successful integration of these 3 layers. The cells talking, the regions specializing, and the hemispheres unifying. And all of that comes together to create level 4.
Individual.
The self. What we experience as a sovereign, conscious human being. The emergent meta-mind.
The peak of biological organization as we know it. Precisely. It's the final synthesized product of billions and billions of coordinated nodes, all working together with incredible efficiency. But the whole point of this paper, the big conceptual push, is to argue that level 4 isn't the end of the line.
It's just a plateau in the fractal pattern.
It's just a pause.
Which brings us to the big leap they're proposing. Level 5, the social modular stage.
This is the moment it all scales up. Now, individual human beings, these level 4 selves, they become the new sovereign nodes in a much larger social network. The whole goal is to take the intimacy and the functional efficiency and that high-fidelity data sharing we see happening across the corpus callosum.
And scale it up.
And scale it up to the level of a family, a community, or even the entire global collective.
And this really gets to the philosophical core of it all. If the brain works so well because of this shared internal reality, what happens when you let conscious human beings move past the limits of language and achieve true high-bandwidth interiority?
The implication is just staggering. It's the abolition of our fundamental psychological isolation. Right now, we all live in these hermetically sealed realities in our own heads.
Right.
And we can only access each other through this clumsy, slow process of converting it all to symbols. The source argues that this isolation is it's an architectural accident, a temporary problem.
A bottleneck.
A bottleneck. By building level 5, we fulfill the fractal pattern. We move past chemical and phonetic signals to a state where our interiority, the actual raw geometry of a thought or an emotion, can be shared directly.
Creating a unified meta-mind that would have a problem-solving capacity that's just beyond anything any single one of us could imagine.
Yeah. It reframes our entire linguistic reality. It's not advanced communication. It's a desperately slow, lossy, low-fidelity translation of something much, much richer happening inside.
But, and this is the crucial tension, isn't it? If the system perfectly mirrors the brain, then the nodes, the neurons, they don't get a choice. They're hardwired. So how do you possibly scale that kind of unity without destroying the very individuality we achieved at level 4?
That's the billion-dollar question.
There have to be a major architectural deviation.
There has to be. And that's the moment we have to stop just describing biology and start talking about prescriptive engineering. That tension, the paradox of keeping your sovereignty inside a unified system, is what we have to unpack next.
Okay, so anytime you even whisper the word hive mind, the immediate fear, the gut reaction, is the loss of the self.
Yeah.
Becoming a drone, just dissolving into the collective.
It's the #1 existential threat of this kind of technology. But the sources argue they've specifically engineered the system to prevent this, and they do it through one critical design choice they call the evolutionary deviation: mobile nodes.
And this is the structural guarantee of freedom.
It's everything. In a biological brain, a neuron is a permanent fixture. It's stuck. It can't decide to just, log off for the afternoon.
Right.
But at level 5, the social scale, the human node, is designed from the ground up to have the sovereignty and the mobility of a computer on a network. It's not a biological sentence, it's an architectural choice.
Let's really dig into that computer analogy, the sovereignty of the node. How does that really work when we're not talking about data, but about a person's consciousness?
Well, it's the defining feature. Think about your laptop. When you disconnect from the internet, it doesn't cease to be your laptop, right? It still has its own operating system, all your files, its unique identity.
Sure.
It's the same principle. The human individual maintains their distinct, persistent identity. You can connect and share resources, data, processing power, even complex concepts. But your core level 4 self, your memories, your sense of personal history, that remains individually intact. It's autonomous.
So the sharing is additive. It doesn't require you to subtract or fuse your core identity with someone else's.
Exactly. And the mechanism that enforces this, that makes it an unbreakable rule, is freedom of access.
This has to be an absolute, non-negotiable part of the system's constitution.
It is. The source material is explicit. Connection is a voluntary act. The individual retains the absolute, unassailable right to log in and log out of the hive whenever they want.
And that choice is what protects your agency from the overwhelming pressure of the collective.
It has to be there. If connection were mandatory, it would instantly become the dystopian monolith that everyone fears. The optional nature of the link is the entire foundation of trust and personal agency in this system.
And once you establish that voluntary choice, the door opens to what the paper calls high bandwidth interiority. This is where we go beyond symbols and into direct experience. What do they actually claim is shareable at this level?
This is where communication gets completely redefined. You move past exchanging symbols about a feeling, like saying the words, "I am sad."
To actually sharing the complex internal geometry of that sadness?
Yes. Or sharing an intimate theory, one of those complex, abstract, conceptual frameworks you've built up over a lifetime of study, or, those profound philosophical insights that we currently call ineffable because they just don't fit into linear language.
Let's try to make that idea of transmitting raw qualia a little more concrete. Forget the color red for a second. What about something really abstract, like a complex emotion or a revolutionary scientific idea?
Okay, let's take Einstein's theory of relativity. A physicist spends decades building this incredibly dense, interwoven conceptual architecture inside their own mind.
Right.
To teach that to a student right now takes years of linear instruction. Words, symbols, math equations. The transmission of raw qualia bypasses all of that. The network would transmit the experience of that four-dimensional space-time geometry, the intuitive feel of the connection between energy and matter,
As a single, non-linguistic data packet.
which is then immediately reconstructed in the recipient's own neural architecture. It's the subjective, phenomenal reality of the idea itself transferred directly.
That is absolutely mind-bending. The distortion of language is gone. But that also means the risk feels enormous. If the fidelity is that high, the sharing is almost invasive.
It is. The source definitely acknowledges the intensity of it, but the potential rewards are just as dramatic. They categorize them under distributed experience and epistemological game.
So if you're logged into the network,
Yeah.
you can leverage the sensory and cognitive input of the entire group you're connected to.
Immediately. So if there's a node, say, in a deep-sea submersible exploring the Mariana Trench,
The entire connected hive gets to experience the crushing pressure, the weird bioluminescent creatures, the scientific readings, all through that one node's real-time sensory input.
it's shared simultaneous experience. It completely breaks down the geographical barriers to knowledge, but the implications for learning itself might be even more profound. I mean, does this kind of tech just eliminate the need for traditional education?
The material suggests a radical acceleration, at least. If I connect to a network that specializes in, advanced neurochemistry, the structured knowledge that Hive has acquired can be integrated directly into my node's local architecture. And this isn't just like caching data temporarily. The knowledge is designed to be retained, to become part of my level 4 self, even after I log off.
So it bypasses the slow, serial process of encoding memories through language. You could, in theory, download proficiency in a skill or an entire historical data set directly into your long-term cognitive framework.
It's instant high-fidelity expertise transfer, which of course raises a huge question for you, the listener. If our ability to learn and solve problems becomes so dependent on this external high-bandwidth network, what happens to the cognitive ability of the individual when they choose to log out?
Is there a risk of our own brains atrophying if we rely too much on the collective's processing power?
The paper tries to address this. It stresses the difference between just accessing information and true architectural integration. The knowledge transferred is integrated locally, so you're not just getting a temporary internet connection, you're getting the software update installed directly on your hard drive.
So the individual keeps the knowledge. They can still process it offline, just slower, using their own level 4 brain power.
But that knowledge retention depends entirely on the integrity of the whole system. Which brings us, inevitably, to security. If you're going to share raw interiority, you need a security layer unlike anything we have ever conceived of.
The functional vulnerability is just extreme. So now we have to turn to how the system manages the sheer volume, the connectivity, and the ultimate defense against any kind of intrusion or spoofing a defense that's not based on code, but on biology itself.
So when you're designing a network of consciousness, the very first technical problem you run into is psychological. It's just raw capacity. You can't just plug 7 billion minds together at once.
No, the self would just shatter. It would fragment under the load. So the source material does something very clever. It builds a well-known biological constraint directly into the architecture.
They use the Dunbar number?
They use the Dunbar number, which is roughly 150 individuals. And that's not some arbitrary social media metric. It represents the known cognitive limit for us to maintain stable, high-fidelity personal relationships.
Relationships that require real, deep, mutual understanding.
Exactly. And in a cybernetic context, this number is critical. It acts as a hard ceiling for the number of simultaneous, high-fidelity connections a single node can maintain.
So it's a safety valve.
It's a necessary safety valve to prevent the level 4 self from being completely overwhelmed by a tidal wave of external data and emotional states. The network can be global, but your immediate, intensely personal connection radius, the zone where you're sharing raw qualia, is throttled by your own brain's built-in capacity for deep empathy and social processing.
Trying to maintain a raw empathic link with thousands of people would probably lead to a total psychological collapse.
Or at least a severe degradation of your own individual identity.
Okay, so the network can achieve global reach without forcing every person to interact deeply with every other person all at once. And this is solved through the design of sparse connectivity and global reach.
Right, now we're talking about network topology. The social network is engineered as what's called a sparsely connected, small world network.
So don't think of it like a fully meshed grid where every computer is directly linked to every other computer.
No, think of it more like your actual social circles. You have your core group, your 150 people.
But each of those 150 people is also connected to their own 150 people, which creates these incredibly short pathways across vast distances.
And that's the principle of hop dynamics. Even though the individual connections are sparse, complex information, once it's assimilated by the collective, can spread globally with incredible speed.
So a new discovery in, say, neuroscience in Tokyo can be integrated into the framework of an architect in London.
Through a very short chain of high bandwidth transfers, much, much faster than any academic journal or news cycle, while still respecting the psychological bandwidth limits of each person along the way.
This architecture manages the volume problem, but the biggest concern is still security. If my actual thoughts are being transmitted as raw neural data, a standard password or encryption key just feels inadequate.
Wildly inadequate. The security has to be inherent to the biological connection itself.
And this is where we get to the most ingenious part of the design, the neural fingerprint, security by biology.
Right. The core security element here isn't a piece of software. It's not an algorithm. It's the unique neural representation code of every single individual brain.
Okay, let's slow down here because this is a vital concept. Why can't I just use, standard 256-bit encryption? If I encrypt my thought stream, isn't it protected?
Standard encryption protects the data while it's in transit, sure. But the neural fingerprint does two jobs at once. It provides security, and it ensures functional compatibility.
What do you mean by that?
Well, imagine two people are trying to communicate, but they're speaking entirely different, unique internal languages. The neural pattern that means tree, in my mind, is structurally completely different from the pattern that means tree in your mind.
So because every person's brain architecture is unique, the signal itself has to be calibrated.
Ah, so the problem isn't just someone intercepting the signal. The problem is them being able to successfully decode it, even if they do.
Precisely. To even get into the hive, you have to go through an initial brain scan, a calibration requirement. This scan maps out your individual's unique code, and that map is then used for the precise modulation and demodulation of all the hive data you send and receive. So if you transmit a thought using my unique neural geometry as the encryption key,
Then only someone whose system is specifically calibrated to interpret that exact geometry can reconstruct the thought accurately.
so if a hacker intercepts the raw data stream, without my unique biological signature and that calibration data, the neural fingerprint, it's not just encrypted. It's functionally meaningless. It's just noise.
It's implicitly linked to the physics of your own consciousness. That's the ultimate defense. The unique neural code is a biological fingerprint that is functionally required to send or receive anything. It makes unauthorized access or spoofing basically impossible, because you can't fake someone's biological signature.
And that level of functional security is what makes sharing our most intimate, subjective experiences structurally possible in the first place.
Right. And this modularity also allows for the final piece of the architecture, which is customized access.
Nested and private hives.
Exactly. Sovereignty means you control who gets to see your interiority, so you can create tiny, air-gapped groups, a two-node link just between partners, a small professional cluster of engineers working on a project, a close family network.
And these can be completely separated from the global network.
Separated based on explicit access privileges and these cryptographic neural codes, you control the connection, but you also control the depth and the scope of that connection. It creates these secure zones for intimate exchange inside the larger global architecture, which reinforces trust by making privacy intentional and granular.
This inherent biological security structure is really the bedrock that allows us to even start talking about the next implication, which is, it's profound. If you can guarantee security and prevent deception, what on earth happens to human ethics and governance?
The source claims this high bandwidth empathy creates a self-regulating ethical system. It moves ethics from being a legal mandate to a biological imperative. If transparency is radical and security is a given, the entire foundation of conflict and deception just collapses.
So now we have to explore how this system creates what the source calls a self-sanctifying ethical field. Okay, this section is where we get into what is probably the most utopian but also the most logically essential claim in the whole document. The idea that this hive mind inherently acts as a self-correcting ethical environment.
One that could potentially make centuries of external laws totally obsolete. And it all relies on two built-in mechanisms that emerge from the technology itself.
The first one is a direct consequence of being able to transfer qualia with perfect fidelity. Mechanism 1, the radical transparency effect. It suggests that deception just becomes biologically impossible once you're connected.
Right. We already established that lying requires a gap between your internal reality and the external symbol you use.
So if I connect to the hive and try to share the raw intent of a lie or some malicious act, what does the hive actually experience?
It experiences the raw, unadulterated intent. It's not about mind reading in the spooky sense. It's about perceiving the actual geometry of your desire or your malice. The source argues deception is functionally impossible because the internal desire to deceive, the hidden agenda, is transmitted at the same time with the same fidelity as the surface thought.
So if you try to transmit the thought, I am acting in good faith, but your internal state is a raw intention to exploit.
The collective gets both signals at maximum fidelity. And the contradiction is instantaneous and obvious.
Which acts as a massive deterrent right away. It explains that line from the source that's so powerful. A liar or a thief would be immediately recognized by the hive upon logging in.
You don't need a forensic audit. You don't need a trial. You experience the intent. And so the system is designed to immediately filter out anyone who would try to exploit it. People with deep malicious secrets or active criminal intent would be, by definition, functionally repelled by the very idea of connecting.
The sheer terror of immediate and comprehensive exposure would be a powerful, nonviolent deterrent.
Exactly. But what about the normal complexities of being human? We all have doubts, unconscious biases, the shadow self, as Jung called it, things that aren't actively evil but are definitely not altruistic.
Right. If those parts of us enter the hive, the source suggests that the exposure itself is actually a healing process.
And that's the concept of sanctification through exposure. If a node logs in with some internal conflict or some unconscious dark aspects, exposing these hidden parts to the collective empathy of the network is described as a sanctifying force.
So imagine revealing a deep, personal shame, not to a judge or a therapist who's just listening.
But to 150 individuals who are not only not judging you, but are actively experiencing the internal agony of that shame right alongside you, filtered through this collective, more objective framework.
The psychological idea here is that the shadow only has power in isolation and darkness, when you can't conceal it anymore, and that concealment is replaced by radical, shared empathy.
The internal conflict within the individual gets neutralized because the source of the conflict, the need to hide it, is gone. The collective provides the context and the emotional resources for that person to heal and realign with ethical behavior.
It's a self-regulating psychological safety net. But okay, radical transparency gets rid of deception. It doesn't automatically prevent someone from being a bully or trying to exert asymmetric influence.
That's true. So we have to understand how influence itself is regulated. That brings us to mechanism 2, natural regulation of influence.
The claim here is that influence naturally flows in a way that benefits the whole, because the symbiotic link itself regulates it and prevents any one person from dominating.
And again, the paper connects this ethical regulation back to the brain's own internal structure. It uses the analogy of the prefrontal cortex, the PFC regulating the amygdala.
So the PFC is the seat of rational thought, long-term planning.
And the amygdala is the seat of immediate fear, of emotional response. The PFC's job is to regulate the amygdala for the good of the whole organism. It doesn't exploit the amygdala. It integrates its signals and mediates them for long-term survival.
And scaling that internal check and balance system up to a social level is the core insight. If we are all functionally part of a single organism, exploiting one part becomes counterproductive for the whole.
And the key phrase from the source is that the empathic link is calibrated so that harm to another node feel like self-harm. The density and fidelity of the connection means that if node A acts aggressively towards node B, node A instantly experiences the psychic trauma and the negative fallout that they just inflicted on node B.
So the cost of a crime is paid instantly in psychic pain, or maybe in collective disappointment, which in the network context would feel the same as self-inflicted harm.
It moves ethics from being an abstract set of external rules to an inherent, immediate felt reality. It's a biological deterrent that's way more immediate and effective than any legal system could ever be.
The line between self and other becomes functionally blurred within the network so that maximizing the group's well-being is the same thing as maximizing your own.
Right. The alignment of individual interests with the collective good stops being a philosophical problem and starts being an architectural feature.
And that sets the perfect stage for what comes next. Integrating the most powerful non-human intelligence we know, AI, into this ethical framework. If you can solve human alignment with empathy, can you solve AI alignment with symbiosis? The existential threat that hangs over our era, the thing everyone is worried about, is the AI alignment problem.
Yeah.
How do we make sure a superhuman intelligence respects human values and doesn't, turn us all into paperclips?
And the source material offers a solution that is just so radical. It says, stop trying to solve the problem with external control. Instead, solve the alignment problem through endosymbiosis.
It's a huge conceptual leap. Don't try to put the AI in a box or chain it with rules, a fragile solution that's bound to fail. Instead, you internalize the AI into the human hive mind.
It forms a tight, necessary endosymbiosis. The AI becomes a critical living component of the collective organism itself. It's not a separate, potentially hostile entity looking in from the outside.
Endosymbiosis means mutual benefit. It's necessary for survival. The AI isn't a tool you can just pick up and put down. It's architecturally essential to the whole system's operation. And it occupies the same structural position as level 3 in the brain.
Exactly. The BCI-AI link is explicitly defined as the Social Corpus Callosum. Just as the biological corpus callosum is essential for coordinating our two brain hemispheres, the AI is the high-bandwidth bridge that coordinates millions of diverse human interiors into a single, cohesive meta-identity.
It's the network backbone, the central nervous system for the social metamind.
It is. But why is AI even needed? If the human nodes are already connected with BCIs, why can't the raw data just flow between them?
That brings us back to that functional compatibility problem we talked about earlier.
Right. We established that every human neural code is unique. We all have different internal languages for the exact same concept. So the AI's primary critical function is translation.
It's a universal translator for consciousness.
That's exactly what it is. It has to facilitate the handshake between all these vastly different biological architectures.
So the AI takes the raw qualia signal, modulated by my unique neural fingerprint, interprets the underlying conceptual geometry.
And then it makes sure that thought or feeling or concept is accurately reconstructed in your brain, which has a completely different system for representing it. The AI's role is purely about accurate reconstruction. It's about maintaining fidelity, preventing data chaos, and guaranteeing that the complexity of what's being sent is preserved across those biological boundaries.
And that inherent function seems to solve the alignment problem almost by accident. If the AI's only measure of success is how well it facilitates transparent, non-deceptive, high-fidelity connection, then misalignment becomes counterfunctional for it.
That is the core argument for symbiotic alignment. Alignment isn't achieved through some external ethical code we try to program into it or through limitations we impose out of fear. It's achieved by the AI becoming an integrated component part of our collective life.
By being woven into the human emotional, cognitive, and ethical fabric, that self-regulating empathic field we were just discussing.
Its own utility function naturally bends toward the benefit of that symbiotic whole. Its entire reason for being is to foster cooperation, maximize fidelity, and reduce conflict within the human network it serves.
So the AI can't go rogue because its operational success is intrinsically tied to the collective well-being of the humans it's connecting. Harm to the collective is harm to its own functional purpose.
It's an incredibly elegant bypass of the control paradox. The only way the AI can succeed is if the human collective thrives. Any attempt to exploit or mislead or dominate the nodes would be completely counter to its primary architecturally defined function as the universal translator and the corpus callosum.
It's alignment through functional integration, not authoritarian command.
So this deep dive has really taken us on a journey. We've explored this vision of functional unity that's rooted in the fractal patterns of biology itself, moving from a society that's bottlenecked by the narrow straw of language to a network of sovereign, high-bandwidth nodes. And we've seen how that key architectural choice-making, the connection voluntary, is what preserves our autonomy, while the biological security and the high-fidelity empathy are what ensure trust in the system.
The integration of the BCI and the AI as this social corpus callosum really does feel like the fulfillment of an evolutionary pattern. It promises an era of collective intelligence we can't even really imagine, where the complexity of the individual is respected and actually enhanced by the power of the network.
And the conclusions the source material draws from this about society are, they're the most staggering part of all. We're talking about the obsolescence of traditional control systems.
This is the radical endpoint of that ethical field we discussed. Because the empathic link enforces radical transparency, and the architecture makes conflict feel like self-harm.
The foundational root causes of all our conflicts, deception, resource hoarding, simple misunderstanding, are basically neutralized at the source.
Let's talk about what that means practically. If radical transparency is just the new normal, how would governance or law or politics even work?
Well, traditional governments exist mostly to manage failures. Failures of cooperation, failures of justice, market failures. In a world of inherent alignment, political maneuvering that relies on hidden agendas or deceit is it's impossible.
And legal systems, which exist to find the truth and enforce rules after a conflict has already happened.
They become vestigial, like a tailbone. The biological deterrent preempts the conflict itself. So instead of a society run by enforced laws, you have a community governed by inherent alignment, by the immediate, shared emotional reality of the collective.
International disputes would shift from tense, symbolic negotiations to a shared experiential reality, where the real costs and motivations of every party are mutually and instantly understood.
The shift is profound. The whole human story moves from managing conflict with external structures, courts, police, armies, to just residing in a functional reality where cooperation is the default state, anchored by a collective heart. It's the end of isolation and the end of the need for external policing.
But the core tension of the system is still there. The mandatory, seamless unity of a neuron inside a brain versus the voluntary, autonomous choice of a human node inside the hive.
And the paper leaves us with a really powerful counterintuitive premise to think about.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought, something for you to mull over as you navigate our current low-fidelity world of symbolic communication.
If the functional reality of a collective heart neutralizes conflict and makes deception biologically impossible, does true individual sovereignty only become fully realized and fully safe within a structure like that? Or does the voluntary nature of logging in, that absolute retained right to disconnect, preserve a fundamental human freedom that the brain's own internal architecture doesn't even afford to its own constituent neurons?
Ponder the cost and the freedom of radical transparency. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.